Nearly a third of New Yorkers want to move out, fed up with crime, housing costs, poor schools, and more. If you look at the bottom with stats, New Yorkers are so worried about crime, sky-high housing costs, and struggling schools. 27% of state residents said they want to move away in the next 5 years. A survey revealed a stunning 30% respondents who also cited inept political leadership and soaring taxes as reasons for wanting to flee, said they already long to live somewhere else, according to Siena College Research Institute Quality of Life poll. Nearly a third, 31%, plan to leave the Empire State when they retire, while even more said they believe it's not safe for kids. Angela Gutierrez, 38, of East Harlem, is one of the New Yorkers who will soon ditch the state. The more and more you looked at the stats, I mean, this was a place that everybody wanted to be at. Bottom stats I'll read to you, and then I'll turn it over to you guys. 67% of residents in New York wasn't affordable, while only 30% said it was. 49% of respondents said New York fair or poor when asked if it's a place where they feel safe from crime. Only 51% gave an answer of good or excellent. Crime surged during the pandemic. 60% of New York is not a good place to retire, while 38% said it was. 57% said the political system doesn't work. I mean, I can go on and on and on and on and on. What do you think is really happening in New York? Because when I talk to New Yorkers, they'll say things like this. They'll say, no one's going to leave New York. No matter what they say, no one's leaving New York. This is the place to be. This is the Mecca. This is where everybody comes to. What's really going on in New York?
People who say that are unfortunately delusional. So I'm born and raised in New York City. Both my parents were born in New York City. 3 of my 4 grandparents were born in New York City. So we go back quite a ways in NYC. I grew up in New York, just for the purpose of the audience to understand what has happened here, because New York went through an incredible, really almost miraculous fix, and now has been ruined again, effectively, or is in the process, I should say, of being ruined. So when I grew up in New York City, which is early, like let's say early 90s, 1990, New York had over 2,200 murders, okay? People go back, and they say there's no way. You can check that statistic. It was 22 something, over 2,000 murders, which when you think about what we're looking at now in different cities, I mean, New York went from 2,200 murders. Giuliani comes in. There's this whole change in the approach to crime and criminal justice and everything.
Yep.
By the time I'm graduating high school, New York is now looking at, can we get below 300 murders? Think about that. From 2,200 people gunned down to, in a decade or so, you're like, can we get it to like 250, 275? So that happened, which was phenomenal. And New York, I do think, obviously 9/11, but actually the response from the city to 9/11, and it was incredible how fast the bounce back was from the biggest attack on our country since Pearl Harbor. And obviously it's what led me to the CIA and I literally got out of college and I was like, I want to help find bin Laden and kill that SOB. Like, that was my mission in life. I went to work for CTC and the CIA. So New York was this amazing place. It got super safe. Clay always says on the show, and it's totally true, that you want to be able to live in a place where your wife can go jogging at night and you don't even think twice about it. And I'm telling you, New York in the 2000s, from let's say 2000 to 2010, 2011, before de Blasio, 100% the case. So then you get de Blasio who comes in. The problem is New York City had been so safe, so wealthy, and was the Mecca that those people talk about, that it seemed like it was, you know, an unsinkable battleship of awesomeness, right? It's just, oh, okay, we can raise taxes, we can start to do things that are, we can go a little more lax on crime. Let's get rid of stop and frisk. Let's change some of these policies. We've made it safe. We don't need to keep doing these things anymore. And it started to deteriorate. What they don't realize is that there's a momentum to these things. Not only did you have de Blasio at the top pushing effectively socialist policies in New York, but then you also bring in, and I had one of my best friends in the world was in the district attorney's office for like over a decade. So I was always talking to him about this, and I worked at the NYPD. You start seeding, they talk about the Soros-backed prosecutors. Yeah, you also get leftist radicals, not only in these different activist groups, but also they start working for city government themselves. They start coming in. They start pushing this ideology more. And then as the city began to deteriorate, you could see that they were still hoping, well, you have to be here. That's the thing about New York. It was kind of like Hollywood and LA and Silicon Valley, right? These places where they got you. There's almost a monopoly on the industry. Well, COVID comes along. So even though there are people like, it's getting dirty, it's getting unsafe, it's way too expensive, they got rid of the SALT deduction. COVID comes along, and now you realize you're actually ruled over by totalitarian morons who don't care if they create misery and economic destruction because they think that this is what social justice looks like. New York is going to take at least a decade, if not decades, to recover to what it was based on the damage that was done, particularly, I'd say, in the last 10 years in the city. But COVID just sent it all into overdrive. So that's how it all broke down.
I felt fortunate because I lived in Nashville, just south of town, and it was like COVID didn't even exist. You know, I mean, I came down here. My kids were out of school, March, April, May. And I came down to Florida, and we spent May because I was like, how often are the kids going to be out for the whole time? We'll just spend a month at the beach. But I think I went up to visit where Buck lived. And New York is great, not because for most people where they live in New York City, but because when you leave your apartment, you can experience the city. And what COVID did was take away the experience. And a lot of people were like, this is kind of a shitty place to live if you don't have the larger experience of the city. And then on top of what Buck said, I think a lot of people then made choices that they never would have if COVID didn't happen. And they said, okay, I'm going to try to do my job, and I'm going to go outside of the city. And what they found out was I can be just as efficient outside of the city as I would be otherwise. Because you would have never suddenly, if you got a successful business, you never would have made the choices to try things that you had to do during COVID. But when you did, I think what happened, and I've been on this for a while, COVID made red redder and blue bluer. And it accelerated what I think has become very much of a national divorce. And I'll be honest with you, if I had been living in New York City or LA, when I started Outkick, to Buck's point, everybody said, you can't run a media business from Nashville. You're going to have to move at some point to New York or LA. I think that's totally false. I think there are a lot of different cities now where there's a lot of talent in them. Miami, South Florida is one. Nashville is one where I live. Austin, Texas is one. And people realize that they could be based anywhere. And so the allure of New York City, when your kids are having to wear masks for years, when your kids are having to live remotely, when you're cramped in a tiny little apartment, you can barely get outside to walk a dog, and you can't take your kids to a park, suddenly wasn't there. And I think it's going to take a while because now people have experienced other things. Buck, you know this. Like suddenly
I'm one of these people.
Yeah,
you're
like,
Florida.
wait a minute, I can $1 million place in New York. I get 700 square feet on the 28th floor of a building. Or I can be in Boise, Idaho, and I can have a monster house, right? And I think it caused people
Baker's in Boise.
Oh yeah,
caused people to experience new things, and I think the result is red's redder, blue bluer, and I think we're just starting to experience that conflict of what that's going to create.
I also think that during COVID, and this was a big part of why I decided to move and leave, and I do thank Governor Ron DeSantis for what he did during the pandemic. I was one of those people. I mean, I was actually the one who tweeted during the pandemic early on that leaving New York City for Florida was the closest thing you could experience as an American to leaving East Germany for West Germany in the 1960s. I mean, you went from, being at LaGuardia Airport where there were actual National Guard soldiers standing, like, what are they're going to shoot the virus? And the whole thing was insane. They're taking down information for test and trace, the dumbest program in the history of the universe. I remember arguing with doctors about this. I was like, guys, test and trace, this has never worked anywhere. This is insane. And they'd say, it works for STDs. Well, yeah, because when you ask, you would think that's a little bit easier to figure out, right? But there was a mentality, there was a psychosis that took over the leadership class there. You came down to Florida, and people are splashing around in the ocean. They're going to restaurants. They're living their lives. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? And then I realized, the 90% of New York City residents who voted, or it's like 80% actually, but 90% of Manhattan is Democrat, 80% of the city is Democrat. They're part of the apparatus now. They're okay with this. Like they've been so brainwashed that I actually reached the point where I was no longer just angry at the time, the mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio. I was angry at the people who were shouting at everybody to wear masks outside because what was wrong with them? Like, what had happened to them? Fellow New Yorkers were supposed to have this, like, tough, we don't take any guff, any BS from anybody attitude or whatever. No, we turned into a bunch of triple masking, wimps who were begging for the government to protect them and do all the. It was crazy. And so I'm angry about what was done to the city, and I'm actually still very angry at the people who were in charge across the board.
What a point to say that, New Yorkers are known to not back down, and now you're just doing whatever they're telling you to do.
That's impressive.
Adam.
Impressive research over there.
Yeah.
Well, Look, I think Clay's absolutely right. Sort of during COVID, the red got redder, the blue got bluer. Born and raised in Miami, so welcome to Miami officially. There,
Awesome, thank you.
I love New York City. I'm actually going this weekend, and I mean, I would never move there.
Yeah.
But spend a week or two there, hanging around the city, still my favorite city. I love it. Everything that kind of comes with the city, the price attached to living in New York City, it's kind of insane. You said you get $1 million house in Boise you get $1 million shoebox in New York City.
That's right.
I actually went during COVID. This would have been when we were in Boca, so it would have been 2021. I do a lot of man on the street interviews, and I went around and I started interviewing everybody in New York. Basically, this was when $30 billion of tax revenue left the city.
Yeah.
And I went just talking to average people. Like, so did you stay in New York? Why'd you leave New York? What would you consider leaving New York? And you get a wide variety of answers, but the common themes were taxes are insane, right? The cost of living is insane. Just basically the prices are insane. And it's, one guy was like, listen, maybe just people aren't tough enough to stick it out in New York. The old Frank Sinatra, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. But I think, I've seen so many people, because I used to work in nightlife, and every basically winter, Christmas, New Year's, like the New Yorkers would come and us South Beach promoters were like, all right, let's charge these mother suckers double. And I would see this love affair with Miami and South Florida from all the New Yorkers. And we would see them kind of tiptoe each year, like, all right, yeah, 1 week this year, 1 month. And then I'd be like, when are these guys going to freaking wake up and realize you could just move here?
Yeah.
And I think COVID basically was the impetus for them to get the hell out of here.
What you hit on, and Buck and I have talked about this, it's not just people leaving, it's the people that have the most resources that are leaving. And, the difference between 13 and 14% tax in California and in New York, and where you guys are in Florida, where Buck is now, and where I am in Tennessee, we have no state income tax. Same thing in Texas. Let's just use those three as an example. If you make $1 million a year, that's $130,000 or $140,000 extra in your pocket. That's $1 million. Imagine if you make $10 million or $100 million. I don't understand. I mean, just being quite honest, I don't understand why anybody who is wealthy, and I mean supremely wealthy, would ever make their residence in New York or LA. And I think COVID, some of those guys were like, well, I've got so much money at stake. I've got a hedge fund. I got private equity. I've got to be based here. Suddenly, when COVID happened, those guys took chances in terms of where they lived that they never would have otherwise, and their revenue didn't change. And then they're looking at it now, and they're like, why would I ever give a government 14% for the privilege of living somewhere?
Maybe that's why your Knicks suck, man. Everyone looks at the contracts going on over there. It's like, why the hell would I move to New York?
I grew up watching the Knicks, and it's funny because one of
Ewing, Larry Johnson, John Starks, those are your guys.
The Bomb Squad, are you kidding me? The Oak Tree, I remember all of them.
Yeah,
my brother had an Anthony Mason jersey because his name is Mason, so it said Mason on the back. Like, we loved the Knicks growing up. I have since stopped watching both the NBA and the NFL for reasons that I don't think are.
What do you mean? You just don't watch sports anymore?
I will not watch. No.
Straight up.
For politics, yeah, I won't do it.
Because everything that happened with Colin Kaepernick and the bubble and
all of it.
And the social justice stuff, you're just
not into it. Won't do it.
Wow.
Don't watch.
And you were a lifelong sports guy?
I mean, I grew up actually playing a little bit. I wasn't very good or anything, but I grew up playing.
Maybe because you just couldn't get that helmet on your head, bro.
What's funny you say that because I avoided helmet sports specifically because I didn't want, like, even this is going to give me a headache if I keep it on because my head's too big. But yeah, so I stopped watching sports. I did grow up though, going to games, Yankee Stadium. But I mean, Yankee Stadium, just to give you showed that thing. It was like my dad would have a talk to me. Like I remember when I was in Afghanistan, like before we would go out, in the city, and you get together with our guys, these GRS guys who are all, they're SEAL, Special Forces, Delta guys, and they're trying to. If you've seen 13 Hours, right? Of course, those guys. So I was, if you see that movie, I was one of the guys that they're sort of with, they're the shooters, and I'm there to, have the meeting or talk to people or whatever. But we'd have this conversation about like, well, what are we going to run up against here? Like, what do we think the chances of IEDs or whatever? It kind of reminded me when I was a little kid, and my dad was like, "We're going to Yankee Stadium." It was everyone in New York was like, it's really dangerous around there. Like, we're not going to go walking around there. And that was just considered, you didn't go into Central Park at night. If you went into Central Park at night growing up in New York City and you got robbed, it was on you. It was like, what are you doing in the park? This is the nicest park in the richest part of the whole city. But like, if you went in at night, you got robbed. So those are sort of the changes that I think happen psychologically in New York. But also, like, you can get I was telling him this the other day too. You can find what you want everywhere in the country now in a way you couldn't before. So in a lot of the big, like New York, Chicago, LA, they had just better food than other places. I know people will argue about this, but they're wrong. Like in the 90s, a good restaurant in Nashville, no offense, was not a good restaurant in New York City. Now it is. Same level, same quality of food. You can buy anything anywhere. I made a joke on Twitter. You could go on Amazon now and buy a tank. I don't know if you still can. But it used to be you're in New York because they had the best food, the best shopping, and all the job opportunities you needed. And if you're a single guy, the biggest dating pool in the whole country concentrated in one place. A lot of that stuff now doesn't really matter.
Don't you think there's a metaphor
stuff
with kind of what you're saying about these cities with exactly what we were talking about with the podcasts? And basically, you don't need to be in these mainstream legacy media companies. You can just kind of have your own YouTube channel or your own podcasting channel versus you don't need to be in these major cities anymore. You can just kind of do it from anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, building on what Buck said, I remember going to New York City as a kid. The bookstores. Like, for people out there who are around my age, I'm 44, you would go, if you grew up where I did in Goodlettsville, Tennessee, which is not necessarily the fancy area of Nashville, you went to Walden Books, right, in your mall. And Walden Books might have, 15,000 book or titles or something in it. And you would go, if you're trying to read something, and I was a huge reader, you would go there and you would hope that they might have a book that you wanted to read, right?
Clay went to Civil War camp, by the way.
I'm a history
True
nerd,
story.
too.
True story.
Legit Civil War sleepaway camp. But then I remember coming to New York City and being like, oh my God, Barnes and Noble. Like, my thing that I was most impressed by in New York City wasn't the huge buildings. It was all of the bookstores that were everywhere and being able to find books you couldn't get anywhere. Now, you go on Amazon, you get any book delivered to your house in 12 hours.
I mean,
right?
I moved to Miami, 6 months ago now, something like that. I haven't been shopping once. Everything just gets delivered that I need, right? And so that's true now all over the country. So it's kind of the Amazoning or Amazonification of the country has also changed. I think one of the big advantages of being in a city, for people who used to live out in like more rural areas, even some of the suburbs, it's like, if you want to get something, you had to get in a car for 40 minutes, right? Now everything gets delivered to your front door, so it changes.
And even pushing the remote concept backfired on a lot of these cities. When New York City or San Francisco, everybody can work from home for the rest of their lives. Oh, really? No problem. I will work from home in Texas. I will work from home from Florida or Tennessee, and I won't pay the taxes. Not a problem. We support your remote. Now they're shitting bricks saying, no, that remote work was just a idea. We got to get back to the office. This is not working out. Commercial real estate's taking a hit. These Class A buildings are taking a hit. So a lot of these ideas that they drove is exactly what backfired on them.
So if you like this clip and you want to watch another one, click right here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click right here.